Good morning, everyone. This is Pastor Jim Davis again, pastor of Twinsburg, Calvary Community Church, Twinsburg, Ohio. I'd like to speak to you again from my living room this morning on it's a little story, a little sweet story, the kind you tell the kids in Sunday school class. It's in the book of Mark, or one of the Gospels. It's also in Matthew and John. But in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 through 41. I want to read it to you. Here's what it says. And the same day, when even was come, he saith unto them, Let us go over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship, and there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Well, it's a nice little story. Jesus gets out in the boat, a storm comes up, and he gets up and says to the storm, Okay, that's enough. And it settles down, and they're all happy to get back to shore and peace and safety. But I find in this short little story, there's a lot of powerful truth that I want to share with you this morning. It's filled with truth about Jesus and who he is and what he's able to do. It's also filled with truth about mankind and what we do. First of all, I want you to notice that Jesus is human. He was born of a human, a Virgin Mary. He lived in human fashion, in human form. The theological way of saying it is he was man of very man and God of very God. But Jesus, being a man, knew what it was like to be exhausted and to get tired because he was human. He put on humanity and he came down and he walked in sandals in the sand, and it would be a long day and a hard day. And that's why when you would come in somewhere, whether you were coming to an inn or to your friend's house, that they would have their servant come out and wash your feet at the end of the day because of the sandals and the sand that would grind away at the pads of your feet. And then after they washed him with water, they would anoint him with oil so that you would be ready to go again the other day. It was kind of a hard life, just moving and getting around. But it was the life that he came to live so that you could never say he doesn't know what it's like to be me. He doesn't know what it's like to live like I live. Yes, he does. And he got tired. Now, the interesting part about this is he got totally exhausted from doing good, totally exhausted from ministry to people who needed him. He was tired, and he was tired from doing that which needed to be done. He was so tired that when he entered into the ship, he fell so soundly asleep that the rocking of the boat and the splashing of the water, even though it was coming into the boat and sprinkling all over him every time it did, he was so soundly asleep that he never woke up. The disciples, they were fighting the storm, and they were upset because they thought they were going to die. And now you know these are real sailors. This was the sea. It was their sea. They were familiar with it. The Sea of Galilee had several names in the Bible. But they were used to being out on that sea, and they were used to the storms, and they were used to perhaps being afraid, but not like this. This one really got to them. And while they are fighting at the oars and fighting to save the ship and bailing the water, they look at the hinder part of the boat, and there's their leader. He's got his head on a pillow, and he's sound asleep. They don't know how that he can sleep like a baby rocked in a cradle, but he does. And so there's two sayings here, one from Matthew and one from Mark. And Matthew says that they said, Lord, save us. We perish. I mean, they really thought they were goners. This is it. We fought storms before, but not like this one. We know what it's like to get caught out here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and fight your way back to shore, but we don't think we're going to make it this time. We perish. We perish. Jesus, wake up. Mark says it a little bit differently, though. Mark says, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Well, Matthew said that they said, Lord, save us, we are going to perish. And Mark, now you know that Mark got his information. Mark was not a disciple, but Mark got his information from Peter. He was a protege of Peter, and it would have been Peter who would have told him what it was like to be out on that boat, because Mark wouldn't have a clue. And Peter adds this, and it probably was the word or the statement of Peter who said it, don't you care whether we live or die? That sounds like Peter, doesn't it? And some days it sounds like me and you. On some days, we're saying, I don't know whether God cares about my problems. I don't know whether he cares whether I live or die. He's asleep somewhere, but he's not in the middle of my storm. And here I am fighting this battle all alone. And the exhausted Christ is there all the time. I have a little bit of an idea what this feels like. I can't tell you exactly what they were going through, and I'm certain that I was not as afraid as they are, but I used to work on the railroad when I was about 22 years old. I was in the engine one night with an engineer who had worked all night, stayed up all day. They called him to work. He wasn't supposed to come back out, but he decided to. I knew that he was tired. He hadn't been to sleep in 2 days, and I said to him, would you like me to run the train? Now, I realized that you would not want to turn a train perhaps of 100 cars, perhaps 1.5 miles long, take you a mile to get it stopped, 13,000 tons of metal rolling down the rail over to a 22-year-old kid. And he said, oh, no, I'm fine. So I look at him, and he keeps dozing over there at the controls. And I said, Bob, are you sure that you don't want me to help you run the train tonight? Oh, no, I'm fine. So finally it was dark. You're sitting there in the dark, looking out at the dark. The heater was on, blowing in my face. I fell asleep. I mean, soundly asleep. Well, that's okay, I suppose, except I suppose you're supposed to stay awake, but no big loss. Until I was awakened by the jolting of the train, and I looked over at Bob, and Bob was sound asleep. And I said, Bob. And all of a sudden, fear grips my heart. I don't know where we are on the railroad, don't know how long I've been asleep, don't know how long he's been asleep, don't know what streets we've gone over, don't know who we may have run over. We don't know if we passed the red light back there. I don't know if we're going to run in the back of another train or hit the derail and go off onto the ground or over the hill. I don't know. And I'm saying, Bob. And he is so sound asleep. He's only about 5-6 feet away from me. But so sound asleep, I have to get up, go over there and shake him. Bob, wake up. Now, of course, he's a man like I was, and he's not Jesus. He still thought he was in control, and I said, do you want me to run this train? He said, no, I'm fine. But I know a little bit of what it's like to be out on my job and be afraid. That's just a little bit of an example of what it would feel like for me to understand maybe just a little bit of being acquainted with what they were going through. But this was beyond normal sailoring for them. Let me give you some facts about this sea. It's about 13 miles long north and south. It's about 8 miles wide, about east and west. It is 686 feet below sea level. On the eastern side, it's a rural side of little towns, and that's where they were going to rest. On the western side, there is a hill. There are hills that go up 2,000 feet above that water. And that water is rather fairly shallow. It's at its deepest point, it's 141 feet deep, and on average, all the way across the 8 miles of the lake, it only averages 84 feet deep. What would happen is down off of the slopes of the 2,000 foot high mountain would come the cool air, and it would roll out across the sea, meeting with the warm air coming up from the water, and all of a sudden you have a storm. The Greek is lilaps, and it means a whirlwind, it means a squall, it means a storm, it even means a hurricane. So this sort of a small hurricane blew up, and instantly there was a storm that was bigger than they were. There was a storm that outmatched their ability to perform. Have you ever been there? Have you ever had a storm that came up all of a sudden and it was bigger than you were? And you wondered where God was and what he is doing. Now here's the next problem. It's easy to make a misinterpretation about God and who he is. Mark this down. I've said it before, get your little yellow sticky pad and write this on it, put it on your refrigerator, stick it on your bathroom mirror, or put it on your forehead, but have this written on it, mark it down. God is never nervous. God never gets nervous. Now, I've known people, and I'm a little slow to react on an emotional way, and because I don't react quickly, there are those who are more excitable than I am who accuse me of, don't you care? That's what they did with Jesus here. Don't you care? Don't you care that we perish? Let me tell you something about this. The peaceful resolve that allows Jesus to sleep in the storm is not a sign of apathy. When Jesus is quiet and all is well with the throne and your world is falling apart, it does not mean that God does not care. You want to know why? Because with him, the resolve is based on his knowledge of himself. He knows who he is. There's a story in the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 6. It's where 5,000 people, 5,000 men plus women and children, were all following Jesus as he was teaching one day, and it was time to eat, and they were way out, away from town and the ability to buy food. So the disciples came and started saying, Jesus, send them back to town. Get them out of here. Let them go back and buy groceries so they can eat. It's too late in the day. It was interesting in John 6:6 where Jesus is talking to Philip, and he does something on purpose. And he asked Philip this question: where can we buy bread to feed these people? Jesus is saying to Philip, where can we buy bread to feed these people? I love the next verse. The next one says, and this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus sometimes allows us to go through the problems of life so that we can answer the question of, Lord, I don't know the answer, but I know that you do. Lord, I don't know how to fight this storm, but I know that you do. And just because you seem to be calm and I am nervous does not mean that you do not care. One more time, God absolutely, by any stretch of the imagination that you may have to dump your tribulations and trials on him, can never and will never get nervous. Whatever your trial, thank God, God is calm. Jesus is human, but Jesus is also divine. So it's important for you not to run the accusation against him. Now, I looked at Bob and I thought, Bob is a jerk. I'm certain that I can run this train better awake than he can asleep. I thought he was a jerk. Well, that's, I suppose, not very nice, but I'm telling you that is not the way that you need to think about Jesus. But it's easy to make the accusation. It's easy to give a misinterpretation. And if you get a misinterpretation, it'll be easy to make an accusation that should not be done. Resist it. It is never smart to accuse God. It is never smart to say that he's wrong. Now, it's not because he's going to kill you if you do. It's because where's the wisdom in accusing someone who's never wrong? Finding fault with God is always, listen to me, listen. Finding fault with God is always a sign that you do not understand who he is. One more time. You got room on that little sticky note? You can put that on there too. Finding fault with God is always a sign that you do not understand who he is. When you start to blame God or feel like you want to blame God, pause and say this: I am missing something in this experience. There's something I don't understand about this experience. There's something about his character that I do not understand and I am missing. And remember, God doesn't mind if you don't know. God minds if you refuse to learn. He doesn't mind if you don't know, but he does mind if you refuse to learn what he's trying to teach you. Matthew said, Lord, save us, we perish. Mark says, had to be the words of Peter. Oh, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Don't make a false accusation against God. The next thing is the demonstration. He stands up and he looks at the storm that has scared the living daylights out of all of these sailors, professional sailors, if you will. And he demonstrates his power that comes from peace. And this is what he says. Maybe perhaps you'd like to hear my interpretation of it. My interpretation is that he looked up at the storm and says, shut up. That's an order. Well, you think, oh no, that Jesus just stood up and said, peace, be still. No. We talked this before when we were talking about Jesus walking on the water when there was a storm and Peter got out and walked on the water as well. Or at least asked the Lord if he could come and walk on the water, and then you know that he sunk. Well, that was another message that I preached entitled, Stay in the Boat. But this is another one of the boat and the storm experiences that they are having. And Jesus again talks to the elements and he says, peace. Another translation says, silence. Now in the Greek, it's what's called in the imperative, it's an imperative command. It's not peace, it's peace. It's imperative. It's a command. Be still, be still. Another word could be translated, be muzzled. But Jesus takes authority over the power of the elements, and I join with the disciples. It scared the living daylights out of them. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think you're probably like I am. That's enough to scare me. If God really came on the scene, and he absolutely worked the power of his miraculous answer to our predicament, I think I'd be scared. I think I'd be afraid. But come on, let's be real for a minute. I think you would too. If Jesus really came, I think that we would get close to cardiac arrest. Interesting enough that the wind obeyed him and the sea calmed down on command. Be muzzled. Stop. Wind, quit that blowing. Interesting that the elements obey God more than God's children do. How many times has he spoken to you and said, stop, don't do that. Quit what you're doing, stop that right now. And we just continued on to do what we wanted to do. But after Jesus spoke, both Matthew and Mark have the same wording that says, and there was a great calm, not just a calm, not just things started to settle down, no, peace. A great calm. Now that's what Jesus is able to do. Sometimes he doesn't. And then you have to ask yourself this question. If God doesn't do what he can do, why is he not doing what I think he ought to? You may need to ask yourself the question, what is he trying to teach me that I will never learn unless I'm in this storm? There's lots of things you will never learn until you hurt first. It is pain that opens us to God and weakens our guard and resolve to do it our way. It has us call on God for, Master, we perish. Help us. Then the consternation. And they feared exceedingly. That seems so strange. And they feared exceedingly. They feared the answer more than they feared the problem. He said, God, we're going to perish, don't you care? And he came over and said, okay, boom, there you are. I fixed it. And they're more afraid of him than they were of the storm that they were afraid was going to kill them. They're afraid their problem is going to destroy them, but they're more afraid of the answer. I think it's strange when I first read it and then I think about it and I don't think that it's all that strange after all. Because we carry guilt within our lives and depression and loneliness and fear and racism and worrying about the future and worrying about hell. When all of the time, it's so simple. The answer for guilt is to simply repent. The answer for depression is to simply trust him. The answer for loneliness is simply to worship him. The answer for fear is a simple faith, I believe. The answer for racism in our world today, how foolish we run back and forth, destroying and calling each other names and ready to kill each other. And the simple answer for racism is brotherhood in Jesus Christ. The simple answer for hell is to be born again, giving your life to the Lord. Well, in conclusion, let me say this. Jesus was human. He understands where you are. He's divine. He can solve your problem. God never gets nervous. He's always able when he is ready. You know what? This whole thing with these disciples could have been avoided. Very simple. Actually, maybe you caught it. It was in the first verse that I read, and here's what it said in 4:35 in the Gospel of Mark. And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, let us pass over unto the other side. What part of us going to the other side didn't they get? How could they have drowned in the Sea of Galilee when the mandate was already established? We are going to the other side. And so I ask you this. as he is still asking the question, and let him ask your heart instead of me. Why are you afraid? Why? Why are you afraid?